"You'll need to move to the main cabin," Lauren Bennett said, her voice hard as stone beneath a thin veneer of forced politeness. 3 black passengers, a man in a sharp blue suit, an elegant woman in a white dress, and a young boy clutching a toy airplane, rose from their first-class seats under the gaze of dozens of curious and some judgmental eyes. Dominic Carter, Amara, and Miles did not argue, did not raise their voices. Dominic merely gave his son's hand a gentle squeeze, nodded courteously to his wife, and led them down to the economy cabin, as if this humiliation were nothing more than a light rain on his shoulders. But in his hand, his phone quietly lit up. A short message was sent, a soft touch, and a silent storm began to churn within Vanguard Airways. Across the city, the phone in the CEO's office rang. An emergency alert blinked on the executive dashboard. Meetings were interrupted. Tense glances swept across the room like a cold gust before a brewing storm, because the man who had just been removed from first class was not just a passenger. He was Dominic Carter, a major shareholder, the man who held the very fate of the entire airline in his hands. And he had just decided there would be no forgiveness today. The glass doors slid open with a soft sigh, revealing the entrance to a first-class cabin designed like its own private world, every detail radiating understated luxury. The warm golden lights, the thick, plush carpet, and the ivory leather seats trimmed with gleaming walnut wood. Dominic Carter stepped in first, his perfectly tailored navy blue suit hugging his tall frame. In his hand was a leather carry-on, each meticulous stitch catching the light. Following right behind, Amara Carter wore a simple yet striking ivory-white dress, her hand gently holding the small hand of Miles, a 5-year-old boy whose eyes shone bright with excitement as he eagerly clutched a gleaming silver toy airplane. Dominic paused lightly in the aisle, his eyes sweeping over the rows of seats, searching for the seat numbers etched into his memory. When he spotted their section, 2 window-side seats with an adjacent companion seat, a faint, almost imperceptible smile played at the corner of his lips. "Here we are," he said in a low, steady voice, just loud enough for Amara to hear. Amara smiled, leaned down to adjust the collar of Miles's shirt, then gently lifted him into his seat. Dominic carefully placed the leather case into the overhead compartment, his movements practiced but unhurried, every gesture carrying the effortless poise of a man well accustomed to luxury without ever needing to prove it. A few nearby passengers, mostly white businessmen and dark blonde women draped in silk scarves, cast glances at the Carter family. Some offered polite nods paired with socially correct smiles, but many looks were tinged with a mixture of suspicion and guardedness, as if their very presence had disrupted the silent rhythm of first class. Amara felt it keenly. Being Dominic Carter's wife, she had long since learned to read the unspoken language of high society, the quick flicker of an eye, the faint press of lips, the subtle arch of an eyebrow. But she was used to it. She simply squeezed Miles's little hand gently and smiled softly at her husband. Dominic didn't need to look. He knew. He always knew. But as always, he chose to maintain his perfect calm. At a certain level, true strength did not lie in responding to every glance. It lay rendering those glances meaningless. Miles swung his small legs over the seat, flying his toy airplane over his knees with innocent buzzing sounds. His world was still a sky full of hope, untouched by the invisible barriers adults unconsciously constructed. A faint sound stirred ahead, the rhythmic click of high heels striking carpet. Lauren Bennett, the chief flight attendant for this flight, was approaching. Her white blouse was impeccably crisp, her charcoal pencil skirt hugged her slender figure, and her golden blonde hair was pinned neatly at the nape of her neck. But what caught Amara's attention wasn't the meticulous appearance. It was the look in her eyes. A steely coldness veiled beneath a thin, professional smile, sweeping over their family like a scanner evaluating who deserved to be here and who didn't. Lauren stopped just a few steps away, her face professionally composed, yet the slight downturn of her lips betrayed her. As if the Carter's very presence was a glitch in a universe otherwise programmed with rigid precision. Amara gently tightened her grip on Miles's hand. Dominic calmly adjusted the cuff of his sleeve, glancing at Lauren with a serene gaze, as if she were nothing more than a passing breeze. The flight had not yet taken off, but already, a subtle undercurrent was stirring in the air, A silent collision, one that would soon build into an unstoppable storm. Lauren Bennett walked straight toward the Carter family, the sharp click of her heels creating a sound that was faint but piercing, like needles against the thick carpet. On her carefully made-up face was a smile as thin as paper, a smile Dominic had seen far too many times before, polite on the surface, cold at the core. "Good afternoon, sir and madam," Lauren said, her tone falsely sweet. "May I see your boarding passes, please?" Dominic tilted his head slightly, not in surprise, but as if merely acknowledging the request. He calmly reached into his inner jacket pocket, retrieved 3 neatly clipped boarding passes, and handed them to her between 2 fingers, without any unnecessary gesture. Lauren accepted them, her eyes scanning quickly over the tickets, then lingering longer than necessary on the line that read, "First class, seats 2A, 2B, 2C. A slight frown, barely perceptible, flickered between her brows. But Dominic caught it instantly. "First class," Lauren repeated, as if she were reading information that defied belief. "That's right," Dominic replied, his deep voice steady and polite, his gaze maintaining a serene calm, undisturbed by even the faintest ripple. Lauren blinked, her smile freezing for a brief moment before she hastily corrected her expression. She glanced at Amara, who was gently brushing Miles's hair, then back at Dominic, then back at the tickets, as if hoping that triple-checking might somehow make the truth disappear. "Please wait, just a moment," Lauren said. Her voice lowered, though she couldn't quite hide the tension tightening her words. "I need to verify a few small details." She turned sharply, walking briskly toward the curtain leading to the galley, the radio clipped at her waist beginning to emit faint bursts of static. Dominic sat back down, still wearing the same calm exterior, though inside him, an old familiar emotion stirred, not anger, but the deep, indifferent chill of someone who had grown used to this game. Amara silently placed her hand on Dominic's olode. "Are you all right?" she asked softly, her voice like silk, though her eyes were as sharp as a fine blade. "It's just the usual," Dominic said, gently squeezing her hand before letting go, leaning back into his seat, his gaze fixed steadily forward. Meanwhile, Miles continued to play with his silver toy airplane, utterly carefree, still living in a world where everyone was kind and every flight was a marvelous adventure. None of the 3 needed to say anything, because the way Lauren Bennett looked at them, as if money could never buy the right to be respected, said it all. A middle-aged white man sitting across the aisle glanced over, his face openly showing irritation. A woman in a Chanel dress adjusted her silk scarf, embarrassed to realize she had stared too long. The subtle currents, the unspoken judgments, began to ripple around them. And Dominic understood. Today, he wouldn't need to raise his voice. He wouldn't need to cause a scene. He wouldn't need to stand up and demand the justice that should have been automatic. He only needed to wait. Because the wheels of justice, when set in motion properly, carried the weight of a storm. And Lauren Bennett, along with the entire system behind her, would soon learn what it meant to awaken a sleeping storm. Lauren Bennett returned in less than 5 minutes, but the atmosphere around her had already changed. A clipboard was tucked under her arm, the radio at her hip still crackling faintly, and her face had hardened a shade further, as if she had appointed herself judge and jury. "Mr. Carter," Lauren said, her voice now stiff and unnatural, "there's been a minor issue with the seat verification. I must ask your family to temporarily move to the main cabin while we resolve the matter." Dominic did not answer immediately. He simply looked at Lauren, his gaze deep and steady as a dark lake. No protest, no anger, but steady enough to make the person before him feel the shift in rhythm. "I don't understand," Dominic said, his voice low and even. "Our tickets have already been checked. We're seated correctly. Exactly what issue is there?" Lauren avoided his eyes, glancing instead at the clipboard as if seeking backup. "It's just a procedural verification," she stammered, before quickly regaining her stiff tone. "Please cooperate." Beside Dominic, Amara gently tightened her grip on Miles's hand and lifted her chin. Her face showed nothing but a calm, icy composure. Miles, small and innocent, simply looked around, confused, his bright eyes unable to grasp why the atmosphere had suddenly shifted so strangely. Dominic took a deep breath. He understood well the rules of engagement in this world. Sometimes, cold patience and sharp strategy cut deeper than any explosive reaction. He stood up. Adjusting the button of his jacket neatly, he reached down and took Amara's hand, signaling her to rise with him. "Let's go," Dominic said, his voice low but echoing through the strangely silent first-class cabin. Amara gave a slight nod. Miles clutched his toy tightly as the three of them left their seats, walking under dozens of gazes, some sympathetic, some curious, a few silently complicit in their avoidance. Dominic led his family down the aisle, his face unchanging, not hurried, not bowed. Every step he took seemed to press an invisible mark into the carpet, a silent reminder that, no matter what the others thought, they could not strip this family of their dignity with a baseless command. Lauren followed behind, gripping her clipboard tightly, her face attempting to maintain a mask of neutrality, even as her hands betrayed her tension. Around her, the whispers began to swell. They had valid tickets. This is clearly discrimination. This is outrageous. Dominic didn't look back. He didn't need to. When the three of them reached the main cabin, another flight attendant, Naomi Ellis, greeted them with a look of visible remorse. Naomi didn't say much. She simply guided the Carter family to a row of cramped middle seats, where the light no longer glowed gently, where the space pressed in around them as if the luxury of first class had never existed. Dominic helped Miles into his seat first, taking the small backpack from Amara's hands with practiced ease, the way a man does when he has made it a lifetime's habit to care for his loved ones before himself. He settled into the middle seat, his shoulder brushing against a stranger beside him, but, in every movement, he maintained an unshakable composure. Amara leaned down to fasten Miles's seatbelt, then sat beside Dominic, her gaze cold as steel forged through a slow, smoldering fire. One flight attendant whispered to Naomi as they returned to the cabin, "This is going to get big." Naomi didn't respond, but deep in her heart, a heavy foreboding was sinking, as if they had just heard the first blare of an alarm, only no one else realized it yet. Dominic Carter sat quietly in his economy seat, his hand resting lightly on his thigh, his calm gaze sweeping over the crowded rows without a trace of confusion or resentment. He retrieved his phone from his jacket pocket, his thumb moving swiftly across the screen, entering a sequence of pre-established commands. A simple message. An order encoded in a language only those at his level of power could understand. Proceed Phase 1. Across the transmission line, inside the towering glass headquarters of Vanguard Airways, a red alert light immediately lit up on the operations system. On the top floor, Victor Harding, the airline's CEO, was in a meeting with the board when his personal assistant burst into the room. "We have a problem," she blurted out, hands trembling as she held up a tablet displaying an urgent notification. Priority alert. Incident involving primary shareholder, Dominic Carter. The room, which had been buzzing with low conversation, fell silent in an instant. Victor Harding immediately leaned forward, his once relaxed face tightening like the surface of a sea before a storm. "Details," he demanded, his voice sharp as a blade. The assistant read quickly. The Carter family was asked by a flight attendant named Lauren Bennett to leave first class despite holding valid tickets. Carter did not react publicly, but has submitted an emergency request to the executive system. A deadly silence stretched across the room before William Cross, Vice President of Operations, slammed his hand against the table. "This is not a minor incident," he growled through gritted teeth. "This is a ticking time bomb." Victor Harding issued orders immediately. "Summon the captain of the flight. Contact the onboard operations team directly. Issue an urgent directive. Apologize immediately. Return the Carter family to first class, and suspend the attendant involved. Prepare a formal apology. And make damn sure everything is smoothed over, before the media smells blood." Elsewhere, the internal line between the operations room and the flight cockpit gave a sharp ring. The captain picked up, his face darkening as the command blasted into his ear. "Mr. Dominic Carter's family is aboard your flight. Fix this immediately. You have the full authority of the airline behind you to act. And remember, do not make another mistake." In the passenger cabin, Lauren Bennett stood pressed against the side of a seat, trying to maintain her composure even as sweat slicked her palms. She couldn't yet explain why, but a vague gnawing sense told her this situation had already spiraled beyond her control. Lauren glanced toward the economy section, where Dominic Carter sat as composed as if nothing had happened, while Amara Carter helped Miles open a small coloring book. None of them had raised their voices. None had protested. There had been no outburst, no fiery confrontation Lauren had unconsciously braced herself for. It was the silence that was truly terrifying. And in that brief moment, Lauren felt a surge of unease, rising in her stomach like an unseen rumbling wave. In the cockpit, the captain left his seat, swiftly moving down the cabin aisle to find Lauren. When he faced her, he didn't say much. He simply threw her a look cold as ice. "Get to the back, now," he ordered. "Follow the directive exactly." Lauren stammered. "But I was just—" "No buts," the captain cut her off sharply. "If you want to keep your job after this flight, you'll act immediately." Dominic sat still, observing it all. He knew. He had anticipated every move from the moment Lauren first asked to check their tickets. This wasn't just about one unfriendly flight attendant. It was about a system. A system that believed it had the right to decide who belonged and who didn't based on a single glance. And today, he would make that system understand. Misjudging the wrong person sometimes comes at the cost of an entire career. Lauren Bennett stood frozen in the aisle at the back of the economy cabin, her hands clenched so tightly together they had gone white. She knew there was no other choice now. The call from the cockpit had left no room for excuses. She had messed up. And now, she had to clean up the mess she had created, under the watchful eyes of the passengers tracking her every move, and more importantly, under the gaze of the man she had once dismissed with a glance. Lauren took a deep breath, adjusted her professional smile, a smile she no longer believed had any real power, and slowly made her way toward the row where the Carter family sat. Dominic lifted his head as she approached, his eyes cold and still like a winter lake. Amara sat beside him, one arm gently around Miles, who was still engrossed in his coloring book, and her other hand resting quietly on her lap, fingers subtly tightening. Lauren stopped before them, her gray-blue eyes blinking rapidly, as if trying to summon the courage she desperately needed. "Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter," she began, her voice dry and brittle. "I would like to offer my sincere apologies for the inconvenience earlier. There was a mistake in the seat verification process. We would like to invite your family to return to first class immediately." Dominic did not respond right away. He simply sat there, his deep black eyes locked onto Lauren, letting the silence stretch for a few more heavy beats, a silence so thick it made her palms start sweating again. Amara, far steadier than her delicate appearance suggested, turned to look at her husband. A quick glance, a silent nod. They understood each other completely. Dominic rose to his feet, his movements slow but weighted. He bent down, picked up Miles's small backpack, and gently patted his son's shoulder. "Let's go, Miles," he said, his voice calm but not soft, like a river running deep, carrying a force greater than any noisy wave. Miles closed his coloring book, clutched his toy airplane tightly, and reached for his mother's hand. The Carter family followed Lauren, moving quietly but firmly, walking against the tide of curious passengers turning to watch them. They walked, not with the bitterness of those defeated, but with the calm certainty of those who knew they held the power to define the game. When they reached first class, Lauren hurriedly adjusted their seats, laying out fresh white linen covers, placing glasses of cold mineral water on the tables, and awkwardly fluffing the pillows, unable to hide her clumsiness. "Please have your seats," Lauren said, bowing slightly as protocol demanded. Dominic sat down first, fastening Miles's seatbelt before leaning back into his own seat. Amara gently pulled a light blanket over their son's legs, her movement so tender that even the hushed whispers around them seemed to slow. Lauren stood silently beside them, waiting like a student called to the front of the class. Dominic turned his head toward her, his gaze devoid of anger, but carrying something far more devastating, the heavy, unspoken weight of disappointment. "I'm sorry, Miss Bennett," he said, his voice as smooth and even as glass. "But an apology does not erase an action. We'll let this be handled in the proper place." Lauren opened her mouth as if to protest, but Dominic had already turned away, a decisive motion that left any words choking back down her throat. There was nothing more to say. Lauren took a few backward steps, bowed her head, and quickly retreated behind the curtain, leaving the Carter family seated firmly in the first-class cabin where they had belonged all along. In the cabin, the steady hum of the airplane filled the space. Passengers quietly whispered among themselves, their glances, whether intentional or not, drawn toward the Carter family, as if they had just witnessed something ending and something larger, deeper, just beginning. Dominic leaned back against his seat, closed his eyes, and a faint, almost imperceptible smile brushed the corner of his lips. The Boeing 777 glided onto the runway, with a soft screech of rubber against asphalt, gradually slowing down. In the first-class cabin, the overhead lights dimmed, casting a soft golden hue over Dominic Carter's composed face. He did not rush to unfasten his seatbelt like the other passengers. Amara remained still beside him, her hand resting lightly on Miles's knee as he dozed off, clutching his toy airplane. Dominic pulled out his phone. A new notification appeared on the screen. Confirmation received. Executive response team deployed. He gave a slight nod, his gaze deep and quiet like the ocean floor. The real battle was only just beginning. At the far end of the airport, inside a restricted area reserved for senior staff, a group of 3 individuals in impeccably tailored suits waited. Leading them was William Cross, Vice President of Operations, known for his cold, forged steel demeanor. Beside him stood 2 representatives from the Legal and Human Resources departments, their faces tense, clutching folders marked Emergency Action, Flight 327 Incident. Victor Harding, CEO of Vanguard Airways, had issued direct orders. Don't wait for internal review. Act immediately at the airport. Quash the crisis before it hatches. Inside the cabin, flight attendant Naomi Ellis gently woke Miles, an apologetic smile etched across her face. Dominic and Amara gathered their personal belongings, their every movement calm and controlled, betraying no unnecessary emotion. As the Carter family exited the plane, the stream of passengers instinctively parted around them, like water flowing around a stone. Some whispered soft apologies. Others cast glances, laced with silent respect. And standing at the aircraft door, waiting, was William Cross. Mr. Carter. William spoke as soon as Dominic approached, his voice low and firm. On behalf of the entire executive board of Vanguard Airways, we offer our deepest apologies. A private vehicle is waiting to escort you and your family from the airport. Dominic gave a small nod, his gaze never leaving William, the way a general surveys a battlefield with a single glance. Amara tightened her grip on Miles's hand, her eyes sharp as a razor beneath her composed exterior. William continued, lowering his voice slightly. The attendant involved has been suspended. An urgent internal investigation is underway. The leadership team would appreciate the opportunity to meet with you within the next 24 hours to discuss the necessary corrective measures. Dominic paused a moment before replying, as if weighing a chess move far larger than the man before him could fathom. I'll consider it, he said curtly. William bowed his head, a thin sheen of sweat breaking across his forehead despite the blast of freezing air conditioning all around them. At the VIP parking area, a sleek black SUV with tinted windows awaited the Carter family. When the door closed, cutting off the outside world with perfect soundproofing, Dominic finally turned to Amara. It's necessary to see this through, he said, his voice low and sharp as tempered steel. Amara nodded, her eyes glinting with a light that would not be easily extinguished. Not just for us, she whispered, but for everyone who's ever been treated like us and had no voice. Dominic opened his phone, drafting a quick email to Victor Harding with a subject line that contained only 2 words, terms required. The body of the email was brief, sharp as a blade. I require a meeting with the board of directors within 48 hours. A written commitment to review the entire customer service and training protocol. Mandatory anti-bias training for all personnel. Independent auditing by a third-party organization for the next 12 consecutive months. A public apology by name, issued across major media channels. If Vanguard Airways is truly concerned about its long-term survival, I advise you to prepare thoroughly. He hit send, then leaned back against the seat, eyes half closed, like a general who had just given the order to march. No anger. No noise. Only the irresistible weight of someone who knew with absolute certainty. This time, there would be no compromise. The next morning, Inside the gleaming glass and steel headquarters of Vanguard Airways, the air was so thick, it felt as though every molecule was bracing for an incoming storm. In the boardroom on the 42nd floor, a place usually reserved for multi-million-dollar strategies and handshakes that shifted corporate destinies, today was the day for a confrontation no one could avoid. Dominic Carter entered, wearing a deep navy suit that didn't flaunt power but emanated a sharp, undeniable authority that made everyone in the room instinctively sit a little straighter. Beside him walked Amara Carter, elegant and proud, her calm gaze sweeping through the room like a soft blade. Standing at the head of the table was Victor Harding, CEO of Vanguard Airways, flanked by William Cross and 8 members of the board, each of them fiddling with folders marked Flight 327 Incident. Victor extended his hand, a professional smile straining to cling to his lips. "Mr. Carter, thank you for coming." Dominic shook his hand briefly, just enough to meet the minimum of politeness, then sat at the head of the table without waiting for an invitation. Amara sat gracefully beside him, setting her handbag down on the floor and folding her arms across her chest. A brief wave of awkwardness swept across the conference table before Victor cleared his throat. "First of all," he began, "on behalf of everyone at Vanguard Airways, I offer our deepest apologies to you and your family for the unfortunate incident on your recent flight. It was completely unacceptable and runs counter to our core values." Dominic gave a slight nod, polite but with eyes cold as steel. "I'm not here for apologies," he said, his voice steady, grinding like wheels crushing gravel. "I'm here to discuss action." Victor cast a quick glance at William before continuing. "We have suspended the attendant involved, initiated a full review of our customer service and training protocols, and are planning to implement unconscious bias training programs across the organization." Dominic listened impassively. When Victor paused, Dominic leaned forward, his voice low and firm. "Not enough." A direct hit, sharp, concise, without embellishment. The entire room fell silent. Dominic calmly pulled the document from his folder and slid it toward Victor with a movement so smooth that even the sound of paper brushing against the polished wood was loud in the heavy air. "Here is what I require," he said. Victor glanced at William, then picked up the document and began to read. The content was brief, succinct, and non-negotiable. Mandatory implementation of anti-bias and equity training for all employees within 90 days. Establishment of an independent oversight board, including external representatives and customers, with full access to quarterly internal reports. A public apology issued across all major media platforms within 72 hours, explicitly referencing the incident involving the Carter family. Introduction of a new incentive penalty system, where the Fairness Service Index directly impacts senior management's bonuses. A commitment to biannual public reporting on the progress of these measures. Failure to fully comply within the stated timeline would trigger Dominic's right to invoke a special shareholder clause, forcing the board to call a vote of no confidence against the current executive leadership. By the time Victor finished reading, his back was drenched in cold sweat. No one in the room still believed this was just an angry customer. This was a strategist. Someone who hadn't come merely to demand justice for himself, but to force the entire system to change. In the heavy minutes of silence that followed, the board members exchanged furtive glances, weighing the costs. Finally, Victor folded the document, lifted his head, and with a resigned gaze said, "We accept all the conditions." Dominic didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply gave a brief nod, like a general acknowledging the raising of a white flag. Under the table, Amara squeezed Dominic's hand, a small gesture unseen by anyone else, like a whispered message, "We did it." Dominic squeezed back, his gaze drifting toward the glass wall, where the city sprawled under a deep blue sky. Because he knew what they had achieved today was only the beginning. Real change would take far more than this. A month after the fateful meeting, Dominic Carter stood by the window of his home office, a steaming cup of black coffee in hand, his eyes scanning the laptop screen before him, where the first reports on Vanguard Airways reform progress were coming into view. The internal bulletin read, Anti-bias training completion rate has reached 78% after just 4 weeks. Another email from the Independent Oversight Board stated, received 36 customer feedback reports regarding fair service, clear trend of improvement. Dominic nodded slowly. It wasn't a miracle, nor a complete transformation, but it was a beginning. A sign that the massive wheels, long rusted by prejudice and entrenched habits, had begun to turn. That morning, Dominic, Amara, and Miles had a flight to an international financial conference, again flying with Vanguard Airways. As the Carter family entered the airport, the atmosphere was noticeably different. At the check-in counter, a young female staff member greeted them with a genuine smile and a courteous bow. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Carter. We are honored to serve your family today. If there's anything you need, please let us know." There were no suspicious glances. No hidden hesitations masked by polite greetings. Only professionalism. And above all, a respect that came naturally, without force. Miles, still clutching his toy airplane, beamed with joy. Amara took Dominic's hand and squeezed it lightly. She didn't need to speak. Her eyes said it all. "Do you see? It's changing." In first class, they were welcomed simply as passengers, not for their status, not for their power, but simply because they were human beings, and every human being deserved kindness. Naomi Ellis, now promoted to chief flight attendant, personally served their flight that day. When she recognized the Carter family, her eyes lit up with a sincere warmth. "Welcome back," Naomi said, her voice gentle but steady. "We've learned so much, thanks to you." Dominic gave a slight nod, his gaze softening in a rare moment. "Not because of us," he said, "but for everyone." Naomi smiled, a smile that came truly from the heart. As the plane lifted off the ground, gliding into the deep blue sky, Dominic leaned back into his seat, his gaze drifting toward the window. Outside, the clouds curled and billowed like soft ribbons of white silk. Below them, the world remained busy, full of prejudice, full of injustice. But up here, at least in this moment, something had shifted. Something had been reshaped through patience, intelligence, and an unyielding spirit. Dominic knew the work was not finished. True change does not happen overnight. It does not come from a single report or a polished speech. It comes from doing the right thing, again and again, even when no one is watching. It comes from forcing those in power to look into the mirror and confront the shadows they pretend not to see. It comes from people like him, like Amara, like the countless nameless passengers who had once suffered in silence. And Dominic Carter, through quiet, unshakable resolve, had lit a flame that would continue to burn long after he had left this flight behind. A month after the fateful meeting, Dominic Carter stood by the window of his home office, a steaming cup of black coffee in hand, his eyes following the reports slowly appearing on the laptop screen before him, updates on the reform progress at Vanguard Airways. The internal bulletin stated, "Anti-bias training completion rate has reached 78% after just 4 weeks." Another email from the Independent Oversight Board read, "Received 36 customer feedback reports regarding fair service, a clear trend of improvement." Dominic nodded slowly. It was not a miracle, nor a full transformation, but it was a beginning, a sign that the massive wheel, once corroded by prejudice and long-standing habits, had finally begun to turn. That morning, Dominic, Amara, and Miles had a flight to an international financial conference, once again flying with Vanguard Airways. As the Carter family entered the airport, the atmosphere was different. At the check-in counter, a young female staff member greeted them with a sincere smile and a courteous bow. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Carter. We are honored to serve your family today. If you need any assistance, please don't hesitate to let us know." There were no suspicious glances, no hesitation hidden beneath polite greetings, only professionalism, and above all, a respect that came naturally, without being forced. Miles, still clutching his toy airplane, beamed with joy. Amara took Dominic's hand and squeezed it lightly. She didn't need to speak. Her eyes said it all. "Do you see? It's changing." In the first-class cabin, they were welcomed simply as passengers, Not because of their fame, not because of their power, but simply because they were human beings. And every human being deserves kindness. Naomi Ellis, now promoted to chief flight attendant, personally served the flight that day. When she recognized the Carter family, her eyes lit up with genuine warmth. "Welcome back," Naomi said, her voice gentle but steady. "We've learned so much, thanks to you." Dominic simply nodded, his gaze softening in a rare moment. "Not because of us," he said, "but for everyone." Naomi smiled, a true smile from the heart. As the plane lifted off the ground, gliding into the deep blue sky, Dominic leaned back against his seat, his eyes gazing out the window. Outside, layers of clouds curled like soft ribbons of white silk. Below, the world continued its restless murmur, filled with prejudice, filled with injustice. But up here, at least in this moment, something had shifted. Something had been reshaped by patience, intellect, and an unyielding spirit. Dominic knew the work was far from finished. True change does not happen overnight. It does not come from a single report or a well-crafted speech. It comes from doing the right thing, again and again, even when no one is watching. It comes from forcing those in power to look into the mirror and confront their own shadows. It comes from people like him, like Amara, like the countless unnamed passengers who had once endured in silence. And Dominic Carter, through quiet, unwavering determination, had sparked a flame that would continue to burn, even long after he had left this flight behind. A month after the fateful meeting, Dominic Carter stood by the window of his home office, a steaming cup of black coffee in hand, his eyes following the reports slowly appearing on the laptop screen before him, the first signs of reform progress at Vanguard Airways. The internal bulletin read, "Anti-bias training completion rate has reached 78% after just 4 weeks." Another email from the Independent Oversight Board reported, "Received 36 customer feedback reports regarding fair service, a clear trend of improvement." Dominic nodded slowly. It was not a miracle, nor yet a full transformation. But it was a beginning, a sign that the massive wheel, once rusted by prejudice and long-standing habits, had finally begun to turn. That morning, Dominic, Amara, and Miles had a flight to an international financial conference, once again flying with Vanguard Airways. As the Carter family entered the airport, the atmosphere was noticeably different. At the check-in counter, a young female staff member greeted them with a genuine smile and a respectful bow. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Carter. We are honored to serve your family today. If there's anything you need, please let us know." There were no suspicious glances, no hesitation lurking beneath polite greetings. Only professionalism, and above all, a respect that needed no forcing. Miles, still clutching his toy airplane, grinned happily. Amara took Dominic's hand and squeezed it lightly. She didn't need to say a word. Her eyes said it all. "Do you see? It's changing." In the first-class cabin, they were welcomed simply as passengers, not because of their fame, not because of their power, but simply because they were human beings, and every human being deserves kindness. Naomi Ellis, now promoted to chief flight attendant, personally served the flight that day. When she recognized the Carter family, her eyes lit up with genuine warmth. "Welcome back," Naomi said, her voice gentle but sure. "We've learned so much, thanks to you." Dominic simply nodded, his gaze softening in a rare moment. "Not because of us," he said, "but for everyone." Naomi smiled, a smile that came truly from the heart. As the plane lifted off the ground, soaring into the deep blue sky, Dominic leaned back into his seat, his eyes gazing out the window. Outside, the clouds rolled and curled like soft white ribbons. Below, the world still bustled, full of prejudice, full of injustice. But up here, at least in this moment, something had shifted. Something had been reshaped by patience, intellect, and an unyielding spirit. Dominic knew the work was not yet finished. Real change does not happen overnight. It does not come from a single report or a polished speech. It comes from doing the right thing, over and over again, even when no one is watching. It comes from forcing those in power to look into the mirror and confront the shadows they try to ignore. It comes from people like him, like Amara, like the countless nameless passengers who once endured in silence. And Dominic Carter, through quiet, unwavering determination, had lit a flame that would continue to burn, even long after he had left this flight behind. One late afternoon, not long after that flight, Dominic Carter sat on an old wooden chair in the small garden behind his house. In front of him, Miles ran circles across the lawn, holding his toy airplane high in the air, making buzzing sounds amid bursts of gleeful laughter. The last rays of sunlight streamed through the tree branches, scattering a dust of golden light across the garden. Amara sat on the steps, a half-read book resting on her lap, her gaze following her husband and son, soft and flowing like a springtime stream. Dominic rested his elbow on his knee, holding a sheet of paper, a rough printout of the latest report from the Independent Oversight Board. Customer satisfaction among minority passengers has increased by 23% within 3 months of reform implementation. That number, for an international corporation like Vanguard Airways, was no miracle. But for Dominic, it was silent proof of an undeniable truth. Change, slow, painful, difficult, was still something real and tangible, as long as there was enough perseverance and refusal to be silent. Miles came rushing toward him, clutching his toy plane, his cheeks flushed with excitement. "Daddy, I'm flying so high," the boy cried out, his voice ringing brightly in the warm air. Dominic smiled, opening his arms to catch his son, lifting him high off the ground, as if with his own hands he were lifting this small, precious future into the vast sky. "I know," he said, his voice deep and warm. "And you'll fly even higher." Miles laughed gleefully, wriggling in his father's strong arms. Amara rose from the steps and came closer, resting her hand on Dominic's back and her head on his shoulder, a moment of quiet peace amidst a world full of turmoil. They didn't need to say anything, because they all understood. Every time they stood up for justice, every time they refused to accept injustice as normal, they planted a small seed in the heart of the world. Those seeds would grow, slowly, quietly, but inevitably, they would bloom and bear fruit. It might take many years. They might not live to see all the results. But that didn't matter, because change is not a single, brilliant moment. It is a journey not meant for the faint of heart. And the Carter family, through their persistence, through their unwavering faith, had chosen to be the sowers of a better world. As twilight descended, painting the little garden in vibrant hues of gold and orange, Dominic sat there, still holding Miles in his arms, Amara close beside him. And somewhere in the echo of a child's laughter soaring into the sky, he heard the quiet heartbeat of hope. No noise, no boasting, only a simple, eternal truth. Justice is not a privilege. Justice is a right. And those brave enough to claim it, no matter the cost, are the ones who rewrite the future.